Scale of 1 to 10, how big of an impact will this rule change have? Trade deadline moving to the Tuesday after Week 9. Not the Tuesday after Week 10 because they didn't want to come out and acknowledge that they're thinking about an 18th regular season game. Andrew Berry, the Browns GM, told us 4 weeks ago that they specifically proposed 2 extra weeks for the trade deadline because they're accounting for the 17th game and the 18th game that is coming. No, don't say that out loud. Let's just move it from the Tuesday after Week 8 to the Tuesday after Week 9. Scale of 1 to 10, how big of an impact?
I think it's a pretty big impact. I'm going to give it like an 8. I am. I think it's one more week for teams that will add a lot more, not only intrigue, news to the media cycle, whatever, but one more week for a team to go, well, we're not a playoff team. Let's be sellers. And another team to go, hey, we won that game last week. We're kind of sitting pretty here. Wait, we're actually pretty good. Maybe we need to push the chips all in the middle of the table. So I like it. And even if it's not a week, if there's not a Week 18, I don't know why not just move it to Week 10 anyways for the reasons we're talking about. But I do think this will add some fun, and I think it'll make some more drastic changes, right, to that trade deadline that maybe we haven't seen in the past. Like this past year, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. It was a year where we had a lot of teams where we felt like, ooh, they probably want to trade this guy, but they're not sure if they're still in the conversation for the playoffs, and they dangled him out there, but then ultimately didn't do it because they were afraid, ooh, we might win the next 2 games and then be back in the hunt here, right? We had one of those years this year where you definitely wish it was pushed back a week.
An extra week of games gives teams an extra week of clarity as to whether or not it's over for them as a practical matter. And it's also another opportunity for a team to develop a need at a key position.
That's right,
because
too.
you get an injury.
Right.
I mean, Last year the Vikings had their Kirk Cousins injury Week 8, and they got the deal done for Josh Dobbs 2 days later. If Kirk Cousins tears the Achilles Week 9, you're SOL for a trade. Look, I'm into complete and total freedom in the markets. I think teams should be allowed to trade assets all the way up until the roster's lock for each team when their season ends. If you want to give up something now in exchange for something later, and if somebody else wants to give up something later in exchange for something now, and that's fine. Why should they be prevented from doing it by some arbitrary barrier? So I'd say push it all the way back to the end of the season. Go ahead and push it to Week 10. When Rich McKay, the guy who we can ultimately blame for your initial presence in the NFL because he drafted you 21 years ago, when he was explaining it last week, and it was just kind of this word salad, nonsensical, all due respect, because it's like you're kind of chasing your tail with it. You don't want teams to give up. And we don't see evidence of that happening, but we don't want to move the trade deadline back because then they will. But they still do. There are teams that know it's over. There are teams that are trading current year assets in exchange for something next year that will help them get better. That's what the trades that happen, for the most part, right before the trade deadline are. A team that knows enough to make the educated decision that it's not in the cards for them this year. So let's move on from a guy that we're not going to have on our team next year anyway and get value for him going into next year as we try to turn this thing around. And why not allow teams to do that later in the year? When everybody else knows it's over for them, why not move those pieces to it's not like you can bring in a guy and it's going to transform a team anyway. That's why I think it's always a mistake. Unless you have a dire need, Chris, for the most part, you bring in a new guy, you're not going to get the most out of him over the balance of that year. You're changing the tire on a moving car.
Well, yeah, you are. There's certain positions that I think, are not as drastic of a change or whatever, right? A corner, a pass rusher, right? Where it's like it doesn't need – there's not a lot of X's and O's or scheme there that's like, oh, wow, it's going to take him a while, right? No, I feel like Week 10 would be the sweet spot. I feel like, I'd have to think about it more, but if you went late in the season, I feel like there could be unintended consequences of people finagling things and players finagling things and doing things like that I don't know if it would work, right? But either way, I think we're on the right path here. I'm glad they knocked it back a week, and I think it's better for all of us and better for the league in general.
All right, let's do these last two very quickly. Replay can now be used to overturn ruling on the field that the quarterback was down or out of bounds before passing. Scale of 1 to 10, how significant?
I mean, 5 or 6, right? I don't know. I mean, didn't we see some plays this year where quarterback, we thought threw it away, And then the referees huddled up, and like Sky Judge came in and was like, "Oh, his knee was down before he threw the ball away." Right? I thought we saw something like that this year. I don't look at this as being a game-changing thing, right? But either way, I think it's necessary, and it's good for the game.
Wasn't that the controversy in the Bengals-Raiders
playoff
game a couple of years ago?
Well,
right.
It was the whistle, thing too.
The whistle,
right.
But maybe you swallow the whistle if you know that replay can come in and fix whether or not the guy was out of bounds before he threw the ball. So I say it's a 10 because anything that pushes toward full embrace of replay review to get it right, I'm for it, because the league needs to acknowledge the fundamental difference between what the 7 middle-aged officials are seeing as they're trying to avoid getting trampled by the gladiators versus what somebody up in a booth that sees what we see at home can do to help get it right. So I'm in favor of it 100%. Last one, emergency quarterback can now come from the practice squad. Remember last year they came up with the emergency quarterback rule. They brought it back, but the third quarterback has to be on the active roster. Now you can bring him up from the practice squad and send him back down unlimited. There isn't that after 3 times you've got to make a roster move, you got to put him on the full roster or release him. No, you can go up and down with that practice squad player as your emergency quarterback. Scale of 1 to 10, how important?
Yeah, 6, I'll say. I mean, again, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, break glass in case of emergency. You're not going to really see the third quarterback involved very much. But I think when it does get to that, a handful of times every year or whatever, yeah, it's good for the league, again, that the game doesn't fall apart. Right? Why were we making it so hard, not only on the teams, but even the viewers, for if that happens? So that, to me, is where I like the rule fixed. Again, I don't want to see a situation again where the 49ers can't even run their offense. That's not good, like we saw in the NFC Championship game 2 years ago. So I like it from that standpoint, and the fact that teams don't have to worry, and now they can keep the extra guy on the roster to help with special teams or be the backup linebacker or whatever. I think it makes sense for everybody on a football team.
The way they dealt with it last year made no sense. Like, they felt compelled to do something, but what they did wasn't real because teams didn't want to carry a third guy on the 53-man roster in order to take advantage of the emergency quarterback option. Now you have your quarterback on the practice squad anyway. You call him up for game day. The only caveat is this, and the way the Bills proposed it, you've already got your 2 standard elevations from the practice squad every week. The Bills said, let's make the emergency quarterback the 3rd elevation. The competition committee proposal, that's the one that was accepted. It's got to be one of your 2 standard elevations. So you're taking up a spot that otherwise would go to somebody else who could have come from your practice squad for game day if you're going to use that spot on an emergency quarterback. But look, one thing teams learned last year, and if you didn't learn it, you weren't paying attention, you better have more quarterbacks around, and you better be ready 2, 3, 4 deep, maybe, between your roster and your practice squad, because those guys can and will get injured, and we saw it last year. And if it happens again this year and somebody's not prepared for it, it's not going to be enough to say to the owner, well, last year we thought was a fluke and we guessed wrong. That's the kind of guess that gets you out the door for good. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.